And I'm exactly the same as you. I've got bundles of energy. I also get up between 4:30 and 5:30 every morning. I see my ADHD and my dyslexia as a real driving force behind who I am, and not too dissimilar. I grew up poor. I grew up colorblind, dyslexic, with ADHD and poor, and I worked really hard to become what I am today. And that led me to start businesses, grow businesses, sell businesses. I now own businesses all over the world. I'm also chair of our King's Trust here in the UK. And I've just got bundles of stuff to give back. And, hearing your story, John, is brilliant because some of the people I interviewed for the book, Paul Orfelia, the owner of Kinko Print, you'll probably remember Kinko Print. Paul was told the same. Paul's about 76 now. He was told, you're going to have to go off to handicap school. He started Kinko Print with $2,000 and it floated for $4.1 billion on the US markets. Yeah, the reality is 35% of all entrepreneurs across the world are dyslexic. 40% of all self-made millionaires. That is a beautiful statistic that we should be talking about.
Hello, I'm John Brink and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people watching us from around the world, they say, okay, we know where Canada is. Right, you're right. And British Columbia is on the West Coast, is it? Yes, it is. And we got this big city called Vancouver. Well, we are in Prince George, British Columbia, 500 miles north of Vancouver. And for all those people watching us around the world, in particular Europe, that is 800 kilometers, and it puts it in the center of British Columbia, north-south, east-west, a big province. Now, Prince George is about a city of about 82,000 people. It is within 50 miles, we have probably 100 lakes all around us. We have nature, we have lots of trees, lots of timber. We have black bears, grizzly bears, we have caribou, deer, wolf, you name it, we have it. We are in harmony with nature. So today, a very, very interesting podcast with Jamie Waller. And Jamie is very interesting. He is dyslexic and a serial entrepreneur, philanthropist, and investor. He is an author and many more things. He grew up in London, England, and that's where he is today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate you giving me the platform to talk about this subject. And it's great to meet you.
So, dyslexic or dyslexia, what is it?
Well, interesting, eh? So I guess it's most commonly known as people that are not very good at learning, and in particular spelling and writing. But as I've learned over the last 2 years researching and working with some of the brightest minds in the world on this book, I would say actually dyslexia is it's nothing more than a convenient title given to a group of people by governments to prevent them having to resolve something they created themselves. It's not that dyslexics can't learn, it's that they learn different. And some of the research we've done just really demonstrates that that's simply it. If they were taught in a different manner, they would be equally as able to read and write as the next person.
So some people would have said in the past, they're dumb, stupid, and they don't know anything, and they will never amount to anything at all. And so now to qualify that very, very quickly, I was not a success story academically. I failed grade 3, and I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said, what are we going to do with this guy? And they said to my parents, send them to the mentally challenged school. They said, no, we're not going to do that. So they said, we'll teach them a profession of some sort. And my grandfather was a master carpenter. My dad was in lumber. So at 13 years old, they sent me to a furniture factory. And at nights I would go to the furniture or to the college to become a furniture maker. So that's what I did. And then I always knew, in my mind that I was different. Kids are hard on each other, right? So for the time when I grew up and I failed grade 7 3 times, that my friends that would go to college and university looked at me and I became a laborer. I'm proud of that today, but then I was looked down on. But I always knew, I was always optimistic. I was happy-go-lucky, but deep down, I always kind of felt I had failed. And then, in my case, I was born in 1940. I will be 84 November the 1st, which is on Friday. And 84 years young, I call it. And I'm now in Canada. I was born in Holland, northeastern part of Holland, actually. And we were liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, 1945. I still remember it. We saw far too much that we should not have seen, became, affected by PTSD, the inner child, and all of that kind of stuff. And then I was so impressed by the people that liberated us. I always knew from that point forward that the Canadian Army that liberated us, April the 12th, 1945, if I grew up, I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. I tried to go when I was 17. My parents wouldn't let me then. I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force, came to Canada in July of 1965. And I wanted to prove to me that I was just as smart as the other ones. And I started with nothing. I had one suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. Landed in Vancouver, went to the immigration department, and couldn't speak English, but fortunately there was a German fellow there. And I had the dream, to go to Canada. The second dream was to prove again to me I was going to build my own lumber mill. And so I talked to the German fellow and I said, I want to build a lumber mill. He said, go to Prince George, British Columbia, 500 miles north. That's where all the timber is. That's where the sawmills are. That's where the future is. I went, and the Greyhound bus came all the way to Prince George. Here, I'm still here 60 years later. I can still see in the distance the Greyhound station. I came off the bus. I had my suitcase, my 3 books, 2 sets of clothes. I counted my money at least 3 times, and I had exactly $25.47. But what I had lots of is attitude. No matter how tough things are today, I always know it's a better day tomorrow. And I did that since the time I was young. The second one that I had is passion. No matter what I do, I give it 125%. And the other one that I had is work ethic. And I work harder than anybody. And so even still now at 84, I still get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late. And so, and yes, I did build my mill, and I did a lot more, but I always felt, even then, people would say to me, you're so successful. I didn't feel that way, even not then. It took me 32 years to find. I walked into a store in 1997. I was already here for 32 years, since 65, and I picked up a book. I still have the actual book here that I picked up, and I still don't know why I bought this book. And I looked at this book, and the book's title was Driven to Distraction. And the more I looked at it, it was about ADHD. And I said, oh my God, that's me. And I wrote in the book, here it is, January 1997. In Dutch I wrote because I was ashamed of it. It was implied that it was a mental defect. And so I wrote in Dutch. Now I finally know who I am. And so, so the book was written by Dr. Helliwell, who wrote medical doctor, who wrote 18 books, 5 on distraction. I did ADHD and dyslexia. And so I knew from then on forward, for me the same. I'm ADHD and dyslexia.
Yeah.
And so,
first of all, happy birthday for Friday. What a great. So you're 84 on Friday, eh?
This Friday, yeah.
I did. So I'm sat here. I'm 45, 46 in February, and I'm exactly the same as you. I've got bundles of energy. I also get up between 4:30 and 5:30 every morning. I see my ADHD and my dyslexia as a real driving force behind who I am, and not too dissimilar. I grew up poor. I grew up colorblind, dyslexic with ADHD and poor. And I worked really hard to become what I am today. And that led me to start businesses, grow businesses, sell businesses. I now own businesses all over the world. I'm also chair of our King's Trust here in the UK. And I've just got bundles of stuff to give back. And, hearing your story, John, is brilliant because some of the people I interviewed for the book, Paul Orfelia, the owner of Kinko Print, you'll probably remember Kinko Print. Paul was told the same. Paul's about 76 now. He was told, you're going to have to go off to handicap school. He started Kinko Print with $2,000 and it floated for $4.1 billion on the US markets. Yeah, the reality is 35% of all entrepreneurs across the world are dyslexic. 40% of all self-made millionaires. That is a beautiful statistic that we should be talking about.
Jamie, it's a superpower. That's what I call it.
Mm.
And I wrote a book about it here, ADHD Unlocked. And it is a superpower. And the interesting part about it is that, I do a lot of podcasting. You are my podcast number 333, where I'm hosting, and then I'm guest on probably another 150 or so podcasts. So my podcast 202, On the Brink, is the podcast with John A. Brink. I podcasted Dr. Helliwell that wrote this book in 1993, and I bought the book in 1997, and I podcasted him in early 24 or late 2023, and it's podcast number 203. And as I had my discussion with Dr. Helliwell, that initially I looked at ADHD when I went through the book, that the frequency of occurrence was at least 8%, I thought. But the more I looked at it, the more I came to the conclusion that it is much higher than that. And during my discussion with Dr. Helliwell, he's the expert, not me, other than living it, is that I indicated it to him that I thought it was more than 20%. He said, John, it's more than 25%. Now, the other part that we talked about, I've been successful in business. I've had a lot of involvement, as you do, with entrepreneurs and company directorships, and I do a lot of interacting with a lot of successful individuals. But I came to the conclusion that successful, and the operative is successful entrepreneurs, and I suggested that to Dr. Helliwell, that I believe at least 50% of them or ADHD. And he said, no, John, at least 75%. I agree with him.
Yeah. Well, neurodiversity, without a doubt, God, I've worked on this book for 2 years now. I was really fortunate. I spent some time with one of the most dyslexic, with one of the most famous dyslexics on earth. You know, I was with Sir Richard Branson, and him and I were talking about sleep issues. Actually, we were talking about the link between ADHD, dyslexia, and people struggling to sleep. And that's what gave me the idea to write the book. I spent 2 years flying around the world interviewing some of the most successful dyslexics on earth. You know, Paul Orfelia from Kinko Print we spoke about, Cliff Wiseman, who owns Speechify, a number of Dragon's Den investors, Shark Tank investors, and I tell their stories. So what I do is in each chapter, I take one person's life story, and I get a real diverse bunch of neurodiverse people within the book. So female, male, 80-year-olds, 20-year-olds, Black, white, Chinese, Spanish. And because dyslexia and neurodiversity, the impacts of it are different. You know, I'm very fortunate. I was born white, English speaking, and with dyslexic and ADHD. There's one chap I interview in the book, a 74-year-old chap called the Black Farmer. And he emigrated to the UK from Africa, one of 7 boys, living in a 2-bedroom flat. His ability to deal with dyslexia was very different from mine. And I think I agree with you that it's definitely, dyslexic thinking has some superpower tendencies, but we should also recognize that it is also an Achilles heel for so many people, especially young people, where it's not detected, it's not supported. And the education system has not improved much from when you were at school, John, to when I was at school, or I interviewed a 14-year-old for the book, Dyslexic Edge. It's not that much different for him today. And that bit's really concerning.
I agree 100% with you, Jamie, and I'm more quite public about it these days in presentations that I give. Even locally, I made a presentation to a major school here, about close to 100 people, young people in particular, 14 to 16 years old, and speaking about things in a general sense about finding your passion, living the dream. That's another thing that I wrote a book about is, what do you want to do for a career? And the sooner you find out, the better in kind of going forward. But I always include issues about ADHD, and lots of times that happens. Several young people come up to me afterwards and talk about issues that they have with ADHD that either has not been detected yet or where they are struggling with it. And so I make an obligation for me to be vocal about it to me. And that's another reason that I wrote the book. And I think there was about 80 kids there. I bought 80 of these books and gave them each a book as well. And so I agree with you 100% that if you look at me, I was 13 when I left school. And the first time that I picked up the book from Dr. Halliwell, I was 57 years old. It took me 5 years before I would go to my personal doc, who delivered our 2 daughters, was a personal friend, walked into his office when I was 62 years old, and he said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we looked at it together, and yes, I do. And so it took me 50 years before I really knew that I had ADHD. And then realizing that for me, it was a superpower, but it changed everything that I did from that point forward. I already was quite successful. I have 10 different companies, and I'm not here to talk about all the success that I have, but I've done well. But I had a number of things that were troubling to me. The one was unlocked by finding the book from Dr. Halliwell, Driven to Distraction. And the more I found out about ADHD, the more I started to understand who I was, and the more successful I became in my businesses. The other part that I had difficulty with, Jamie, and maybe you can make a connection there from the books that you did or from interviewing or your personal experience, is that I was born in Holland in 1940, was there till I was 23. I grew up in the northeastern part of Holland, close to the German border, in the province called Groningen, and we speak a dialect there. The dialect is such that most of the people in Holland cannot understand when I have a discussion. And so, but I liked speaking dialect. So when I was drafted into the Air Force when I was 18, I had to acquire the skill of speaking High Dutch. And I barely got that part under control. And then I went to Canada and had to learn to speak English, because by the time I got to Prince George, I didn't speak the language. And I started as a cleanup man, and from that level, but obviously since that time, I've not only become I'm good in speaking English, but I become an author, and then I'm an in-demand keynote speaker and doing all the other things. The point that I'm making is that my dyslexia did not stop me from becoming a writer. I've always been a good writer. Even in grade 3 and grade 7, I was not a good reader or understanding and even now, if I read things, I'm not good at that. Although I did for my 5-6 books that I'm doing, I did all the audio myself, but it takes me longer to do it. But I thought it was very important that I did them. And the last one that I did, Living Young, Dying Old. And that's a picture of me, actually, is I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I saw that in preparation for this interview, and congratulations. I mean, what a great thing to maintain. So a couple of things, if I may, picking out in the story. So yes, absolutely. Dyslexia. I want to tell you some really interesting recent research and studies, but I'm going to come back to that. Before I do, look, those with dyslexia are great storytellers, because we learn at a very young age to communicate vocally rather than on paper. Now, when our writing catches up, we can write those stories down. We might not spell the words perfectly right, but we are great at storytelling. And I would argue that storytelling is one of the most powerful things on earth for anybody to be good at, not just entrepreneurs. And that's why so many people with dyslexia find themselves in entrepreneurship, I believe. But, there's also, you mentioned earlier on, John, that you wake up at like 5:30 in the morning, as do I. But the links between ADHD and abusive substances, mainly alcohol, are very true, because when you have ADHD, it's very difficult to quieten the mind. And if the ADHD and your dyslexia has driven you towards entrepreneurship, as it is for you and I, then you've already got a busy mind, because you've got stuff on your mind at all times. So you've got this ADHD, you've got dyslexia, you've got a busy life, and you put your head on the pillow and you can't get to sleep. And what most people do is they find alcohol to enable them to sleep to begin with. And that, of course, spirals out of control as life progresses. So it's really interesting now when I talk to young people, that's the message that I'm quite keen to get across. Don't let that become your medicine. So you and I get up at 5:30 in the morning. We both love to work out. I go and do CrossFit. You're doing body. We have found a connection to be able to go, okay, I'm going to live with it. I get up at 5:30. I'm going to use that to my benefit. I want to live a healthy, long life. Let's get going. I meet a lot of people that don't want to get up at 5:30. So what they do is they drink half a bottle of whiskey of a night so that they sleep until 9. And this is just because they're trying to quieten their mind. And, to learn the tools of how to quieten your mind without alcohol or without some other form of prescription medication is really quite difficult. I want to share this story with you because this is just brilliant. So I reached out to professors across the world that have been working in dyslexia because I wanted to have that theme run through the book, some real research and studies. And I worked with Dr. Helen Taylor from Cambridge University here in the UK, who is dyslexic. And Helen had done some amazing research, which she had just got published, which is that, in fact, there's two types of people born into this world. There are explorers and exploiters. And there's roughly 15% of the population are explorers and 85% exploiters. Now, pre-500 years ago, the explorers would have done all the things that were absolutely necessary: find new territory, find food, keep on persistent, failing, coming back. And when they found something, they would bring it back for the majority of the population to then exploit and make into something normal. If you have a look at the positive traits of dyslexia and the traits of an explorer, they match perfectly. And what Dr. Helen Taylor goes a long way to show is that, in fact, we are merely born either explorers and exploiters, and explorers have now been given this badge called dyslexia, because when the process of learning was designed, which in the main was designed by the church, who were petrified of losing the story of Jesus. They didn't want brain drain when people were dying at age 30. So they got people to sit down, write this stuff out, and other people to read it, learn it, so that they could keep on saying the message. Now, when they did that, they did this for the people that were there. The 85% of the people that sat at camp. The 15% of the people that were off finding new territories were not ever taught in this way. So it took us a long time to realize that the way we were teaching was simply not sufficient for the entire human race. And these explorers that we now give this badge of dyslexia to needed a different way of learning. And if you think about that, if you start getting the message out that if you have been given the badge of dyslexic person, the likelihood is you were born an explorer, and your value on earth is to go and explore, find, create, be curious. And you find me any dyslexic person, and we're very close to this for many years now, they are all curious. They are all explorers. The only one trait that doesn't naturally come to you as an explorer, that you also have as a dyslexic, is this real sort of anger towards injustice. And that is definitely gathered through life because you get so angry of being put down, being told you're thick, being put in a corner, being red marks through your book, crosses on pieces of paper. That builds this real anger towards injustice. And what you do find a lot of in those with dyslexia is that when they do become successful in their careers or in entrepreneurship or the creative fields, they normally find something connected to a sense of injustice. They can't stand seeing something that they believe is wrong without trying to fix it. And I think that's lovely, and I think we need to celebrate that in so many ways.
I love it. I agree with you 100%. The interesting part about me was that, I'm a good writer and I'm a storyteller. First and foremost, if somebody says to me, what makes you a good writer? I'm a storyteller. And then the other amazing part about myself, and I look back on who I am, dyslexia, ADHD, and is that I've always kind of looked at it as a benefit. And a lot of people say to me, do you feel bad about that you failed grade 7 3 times? And I said, yeah, I do, actually. And I really, really do. I think I should have quit earlier because for me, it was just not the right place to be. And I said it somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but I agree with you 100% that the other part that I found, I've always been very good at numbers, even when I was young, and I still am today, hence it makes me successful. And the other part is I have an amazing memory. Yesterday, I did a keynote presentation, actually in Vancouver, about 300 people or so, and there were a number of presenters, and I had to do about 30 minutes, and I remember what I want to speak about, but I have an amazing memory of being able to recall in my mind the things I want to speak about, and it makes it interesting. A lot of people don't have that. I do. And it has been one of the advantages. It wasn't always that way with me. So a lot of times, and I'm telling you this, or sharing this with you to see if you can see the connection. Because of all the things that happened to you, to me, is I did not have the confidence in myself right up to the time likely that I was 50 years old in 1990. I was already successful, but interacting with people was something that I had difficulty with, maybe with 3 or 4 people in my company, but not outside of there. Then somebody suggested to me, they wanted to take me to Toastmasters. I don't know if you're familiar with Toastmasters. It's about communications. And a lot of people say to me, what is Toastmasters all about? Is it all about speaking? I said, no, it's more than anything about listening. And then secondly, of being able to stand up, think on your feet. And maybe speaking after that. And so the first meeting that I went to is, I didn't want to go. So somebody said, okay, come with me, go down. I said, is somebody going to ask me questions? They said, no, you just sit there and watch it. Halfway through the meeting, somebody said, hey, John, tell us all about you. I said, oh my God, I'll never go back here. But I stayed there for 10 years. I became a distinguished Toastmaster, which is the highest level. I changed my life because I have the ability, but I did not have the confidence. And it gave me the confidence in combination with understanding. Then later in the 90s and 97, when I saw ADHD, dyslexia, combining it all together, the books that I'm writing, and I'm working on my 5th and 6th book, the 5th one is nearly done, is that all of that started in my late 70s already. And so it then allowed me the process of writing, put a good team around me, but I'm basically a storyteller. That's who I am.
Well, I mean, we all know the famous story from Warren Buffett, right? I mean, he says the best investment he ever made was on himself, and it was a sort of I think it was a $25 public speaking course, and you know we have to focus on this in a world more today than ever, when young people are glued to their smartphone and they are not naturally communicating. So if you think, John, when you grew up or when I grew up, you couldn't get on a bus without communicating. You couldn't buy something from a shop without communicating. You couldn't function throughout a day without communicating. You could, if you wanted to now, function completely without any error whatsoever for a whole week without communicating, simply through the tools of your smartphone. And, we need to be careful about that. And we spend a lot of time talking bad about the social media companies, and I'm not a fan of them myself in many ways, of how young people are being allowed to use these tools to the capacity that they are. But we shouldn't forget that they can only access the social media through a smartphone in the most. They're not walking around with laptops. So the smartphone companies are not to blame either. But let's accept that when you were growing up, John, I'm sure that when people started watching TV, older people said, this is going to be terrible for children. So we all have these moments.
Yeah.
Social media, mobile phones are here to stay. But what we do need to do is get young people at a very young age more focused. I've got a 7 and 8-year-old, John, and I am so focused every single day, every time we're in a restaurant, every time we walk past someone, hold the door open, say thank you, say good morning. I just want them to be communicating all of the time. And when they're asked to do a presentation at school, and all of their friends are doing stuff on PowerPoint. My children are going in with A3 artist boards. They're sticking stuff on, they're writing stuff on, and they're presenting with these in their hands, because I'm a strong believer that it's a quality that will get you so, so far in life. Not just financially, but it'll help you meet your partner. It will help you make good friends. It will help you get married. It just has unlimited amount of benefits, and we should be spending lots and lots of time on.
The interesting part about it, and I agree with you 100%, Jamie, is that, if a good example in the fifth book that I'm writing is nearly done. It's coming out in June of next year. It's about communications in particular, the new media in particular. And part of the new media is not the news, the newspapers anymore. It is more like virtual television, is what you and me are doing here. And you are very, very active on podcasting and interaction with people. And can you imagine, you are in London, and it must be close to midnight right now. And I'm sitting in central British Columbia, and it feels like you're sitting right next to me right here. And in the short period, I looked at your bio, you looked at mine, and we developing a relationship, because soon as I looked at your bio, the connection between you and me is so immensely close, and this experience so much closer. But what the beauty of it is, I gave a presentation, as I said to you, in Vancouver just today, to a group of about 250 people. And it was a very good presentation. I know, because I can move around where other ones read off documents. That doesn't work for me. But I give the presentation, I float around. They will always remember me doing my presentation. Thank you, Toastmasters. Thanks, ADHD, dyslexia, and all the other things around it. But it has happened is that 8 years ago, maybe, I started blogging locally, and then gradually worked with a television station locally, interviewing people from the area here, and we have lots of interesting people. And then what happened? COVID came, and we couldn't do that anymore. And then we said, what do we do now? So I had this apartment that we are in today, and she said, well, let's turn it into a studio. So we did, got very good equipment, very good cameras, and all of those kind of things. And so we started then interviewing on the two benches. Usually I sit there, the guest is here. And so then we were running out of guests. And so we then joined Podmatch, and we started Podmatching. And the more I looked at television, I see CNC, BBC, international stuff. I see 1, 2, 3, 4 different people from all over the world, all interacting together and saying, let's do virtual. And now we do probably 5 or 6 podcasts a week. And most of them are virtual from people around the world. And it is amazing, because you and me have very interesting discussions. We know already that tens and tens, if not hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people will watch our podcast. I know we will. We have close to 700,000 people on YouTube alone that are subscribers. 600,000, I think, on YouTube, going towards 1 million, and around the world, we probably well over 1 million people. Can you imagine that? And there I give my presentation just today in Vancouver. It took me a day and a half to fly from here, got there by the time I got back. And I like to do that, but it's 250. Our conversation, I know millions of people, millions, will watch our podcast. And that's the amazing. And it's just at the beginning.
Yeah, and I mean the power of the technology that's just in our hands. I mean, you've got a great setup there, and that's brilliant. But you think, people can do some of this stuff off a mobile phone. You've got people doing 2-minute videos on TikTok that are getting 20 million people, 20 million eyeballs on it. So, I mean, the world is changing. And actually, one of the nice things, though, when I was writing the book is I wanted to spend, because I was interviewing people and I wanted to tell their life story from when they were born to where they were today. And I wanted them to feel free to tell me everything. And it's quite but also, John, I didn't want anybody to have editorial rights, because you try and get 14 entrepreneurs to edit something, it is never going to get done. So I flew all around the world and spent half a day, sometimes more, in people's living rooms, in their kitchens, in their gardens, interviewing them. Poor Orfelia in Santa Barbara, I reached out to him totally cold. He said, yeah, sure, come out. And I flew out. I sat in his garden all day. We had dinner, and you really get to know people so well. And then what I can do in my writing is I can tell their stories, but also more importantly, what we do at the end of every chapter is we pull out the typical dyslexic thinking traits that got that person to where they are today and drove their success. So the book isn't just for those with dyslexia. In fact, it's much more powerful for those without dyslexia that want to know why so many successful people have dyslexia and what they might be able to implement in their own life self-improvement strategies or their own businesses to get a similar success. And that's when we can start to put those with dyslexia on this platform to say, what you have is special and you can teach other people how to think that way too. That is really powerful and a lovely thing to do. You said earlier on that you took some books up to one of your talks and gave them to the young people there.
Yeah.
We've just had this awareness week, and I did a book. I did 1,000 books across every school in the city of London. Yeah, and I personally wrote a message in them, and I spent all week getting them out the door on the basis of, this is not about selling books. This is about making those with dyslexia feel better about themselves. It's making those with dyslexia that haven't been diagnosed, as you were not, John, have the confidence to go and be diagnosed and wear that badge more proudly going forward. I also wasn't diagnosed until I was 36. And those that don't have dyslexia, we want to share with you what's going on in our minds so that you might be able to implement some of those things too. And I think that's what's made this such a popular and a great book across the world.
And I agree, Jamie. And the same with ADHD, dyslexia. A lot of times, both are in the same person in a lot of cases. And so what I say about ADHD, that the frequency of occurrence in my mind, especially after my interview with Dr. Helliwell, is that probably close to 30% of the population have ADHD. And then the other part about it, that I say, is the ADHD book that I did is also not only for ADHD or dyslexia, but also for slow learners because of trauma or whatever has happened to make them slow learners, is that it is very, very important for people that do not directly have it, is that it is virtually impossible not to interact with them, either in your family, your working area, or the public around you, or your friends. It's good to read about it because they tend to be somewhat different, not in a bad way, but in a good way, to understand them. So read my book, your book about dyslexia, get to understand it, what makes them click, and why are they different. But the other part is maybe discover it in themselves and saying, you know something, I believe that I have that too. Because for me to go out and say, as you did, probably 20, 30 years ago when I was in my 30s, in 40s and saying, I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. Really? So I would not, or to then say, after I discovered that I had ADHD, I'm building a company. So I'm making proposals to financial institutions for millions of dollars to acquire property or build property and saying, oh, by the way, I know you like my proposal and it looks very, very good. I should mention to you that I have a mental disorder. Hello, have a nice day, right? So, but
Do you hide it?
well, yeah, you can't be public about it, but you should be. And what you do, what I do now, is not only not hiding it, but we are much more public about it because I believe, as you do, I believe, is that it's a superpower. It makes people successful. And these are the reasons as to why and where they are different. And for a lot of people, what can you learn from it?
Well, that's and what we do so brilliantly in the book is go, well, a dyslexic person picking up this book is going to get comfort in, oh yes, that's like me, that's what happened here, that's what happened here. But a non-dyslexic person is going to pick it up and go to the and read a chapter, and then when they get to back of one of the chapters, they'll go, okay, so here's the tips. So, one of these tips from a chapter, this is a chap called Matt Kennedy. He makes a global deodorant, a natural deodorant business. And, this one was about be beautiful. Those dyslexic thinkers are very focused on the look of things, the creativeness, the design, and how important that is. If you think about Steve Jobs, another dyslexic thinker, you think when you open the plug from your Apple phone and the transparent paper just sort of peels off so nicely, or the cardboard box. Steve Jobs was the first person to invent the cardboard box that you simply just poured along the perforated edge and it opened up so nicely. That didn't come from somebody who was just thinking about selling product.
No.
He was thinking, how am I going to make the customer feel? How is this going to be a beautiful experience? And that is a typical dyslexic way of thinking. And, you think about dyslexic thinkers, I mean, they're the creators of light, flight, the iPhone, Einstein, Picasso, the creativeness, the energy that these people bring to society is so valuable. And I want those young people, or your listeners and viewers that think their children might be dyslexic, the association, the American Association for Dyslexia did a study recently that said the two biggest blockers for young people getting help with their dyslexia are first their parents and second their school teachers. And you go, why? And when you dig deeper into the research data, their parents, because their parents purely believe that they will grow out of Johnny learns a bit slower than Tracy. It'll be okay. And then they leave it too late, and then they get worried about the consequences. Teachers are worried that there's no resource to deal with the children. So they go, I'll just help him a bit more. I'll make sure he's okay. But obviously, you're only with that teacher for a while, and then you go off to another teacher, and you get lost in the system. Don't let that happen to anybody. If you believe that they may be struggling, because they will be struggling at a young age with dyslexia, get them diagnosed and get them the assistance they need now. Because I feature people in this book that left school like you and I with little education, but I also feature people that have MBAs from some of the best universities on earth that have dyslexia. My wife is dyslexic and has a master's degree from one of the best universities in the UK. Dyslexia does not equal low IQ.
Dr. Halliwell wrote 18 books in already 1970, 5 on distraction, dyslexia. And so, but it's interesting now, Jamie, it is becoming, but I feel gradually too slow for me, probably for you as well. But gradually it's becoming more and more accepted as not as a liability or a dysfunctional way of being, but rather people that are uniquely different for reasons that do not have to be a liability to them. In fact, it can be just the opposite. And the examples are all around us.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, as I said earlier on, I was fortunate enough to spend quite a lot of time with Sir Richard Branson, one of the most famous dyslexics on earth. And Richard has gone a long way to drive this message. And hopefully, I'm now picking up a bit of that responsibility to try and drive it to yourself, John. And there's a lot of energy around sharing this information now. And I think the more of us, I applaud any of your listeners or viewers that are dyslexic to go out and tell somebody that they are, because it will really help build a community of people that are no longer hidden away. And there's nothing worse than you can do to somebody than have them hide away from being outspoken about this and get the help that they need. And that help might be something very basic, like, at least once a day I'll call upon my wife to help me spell something. Now, if I hadn't have told her I was dyslexic, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I would have had to have gone away in a corner and Googled how I spell something, etc., etc. It's a waste of my time. I've got a lot of energy. I should be doing really valuable stuff, not Googling how to spell. So, let's be vocal about it. Tell people, hey, I'm dyslexic, so that you can then lean on people to get the support you need.
In honesty and in fairness, Jamie, I became much more public about ADHD after I read the book of Dr. Halliwell, and I included it in discussions. I've used it in podcasting, but it's less than a year ago that I used dyslexia as well, because that's me. And I've known it for a long time, but I did not know what it was. I thought I was just slow in a lot of areas. But even my wife says to me, no, you've always been like that. I ask her, how do you spell it? How do you say it? And the people that actually were part of my team, both Scott and Amanda here, is that were involved with me doing my books and doing the audio portion of my book, and I'm slow. But, but it became much more important for me that I speak about it and that I'm vocal about it.
Yeah. But a great entrepreneur, John, called Cliff Wiseman. He owns a company, Californian tech company called Speechify. And I flew into Miami to interview Cliff for the book. And Cliff, at the time when I interviewed Cliff, I'd already interviewed all of the people I wanted for the book. And somebody said to me, you should talk to this guy. He's an Israeli-American living in Miami, got a great tech business. So I flew out to meet him, and I thought, well, it's always good to have another couple of contributors just in case. And in the first 2 minutes of pressing record, he said to me, I won't read it line by line, but he said something along these lines. He said, what's 4,342 divided by 16? Now divide that by 12. This is what it's like for somebody like me with dyslexia reading a paragraph like this. And as soon as he said that, John, I said, not only are you making the cut for the book, you're going to chapter 1.
Yeah.
Because there is not a better way of explaining what it's like for somebody with dyslexia. By the time you get to the end of a paragraph, you forgot what the beginning of the paragraph was about. And that is a challenge. So we have to use the superpowers that come with dyslexia, because the Achilles heel, the negatives are still with us. They don't go away.
Yeah. And I still, because I only became public about it fairly recently, and I discovered it only after I talked to Dr. Halliwell, that I am both. And so that anytime, even in meetings now, if I have to read something, it's very difficult for me. And so, but I can remember very, very easily, but for me to put it into reading it and same as most of the presentations that I do, is no use to me taking documents because I get just stuck in the document, and I'm much better off memory. So my memory compensates, and most people say to me, he has an amazing memory. That's the reason why.
Yeah, no, I find the same.
A couple of questions. So somebody said to me that you were going to fly in space with Richard. Tell us about.
I am.
Tell us about.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate that I am one of the not so many people that have a ticket to fly on Virgin Galactic. So I'm due to fly potentially next year. It may have slipped into 2026 due to some aircraft building delays. But Richard's already been up. I've been out to spaceport and seen a couple of flights myself. That Virgin Galactic has had 7 successful flights in and out of space, and I'm on that list, and I am raring to go. And I am going back to that explorer versus exploiter, I am in massive exploration territory there.
So the other part, I was just reading through your questions to be asked, and one of the ones that I liked is that should all businesses therefore actively recruit dyslexic thinkers? But it reminds me of this is that I was looking for a manager in one of my companies that I have, so to be put in national advertisement out with all the credentials that we were looking for. At the bottom we wrote that ADHD would be considered to be an asset.
Well, I love it, John. I love it. And one of the things that I have on the bottom of my email signature is expect small typos but big ideas. And I tell everybody that's dyslexic to try and add it to their email signatures. But look, we have all known for many years that diversity on board and in decision making adds value. Female, male, young, old, different races, different backgrounds. A diverse mixture of people will generally lead to better outcomes. So should we now start to consider dyslexic thinking amongst those categories? I would say yes. I would like to see companies actively putting out job adverts recruiting for dyslexic thinkers, because I think they bring a different perspective to some very tricky, regular weekly conversations in most people's businesses.
So that being said, as we are to the end of our program, getting closer, can you show us your books once more, Jamie, and then tell us where we can get them? So
the Dyslexic Edge,
yeah,
it's available globally in all formats, so you can get it on Audible or Kindle or in print. Obviously, the go-to place will probably be Amazon. It is available at all major bookstores as too, if you wanted to support a more local retailer. But it's available globally. It was released just about a month ago. It's been selling fantastically in the tens of thousands all over the world. People are really capturing onto it and enjoying it. It's got some great stories in there. It's 14 mini stories, each featuring a successful dyslexic person, a master chef, a print billionaire from the US, mobile phone telecommunication billionaire from the UK. You name it, it features it, but it tries to pull out the dyslexic thinking traits and gives them to the reader or the listener so that they can implement some of those things in their own life strategies too.
Now, you have done some other books, right?
I have. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I love your business, John. So when I was doing my research on you for today's podcast and I saw your business path, so my first book was a book called Unsexy Business, which is another passion of mine. It's a real passion of mine that you don't need to be an inventor to become an entrepreneur. You can simply take an old idea and do it slightly different. You know, you could open a coffee shop that does better customer service and still be a good coffee shop. But my fear is with media today, we're all convinced that we have to come up with a new idea to be able to start a business, and that's not true.
So I started writing quite late, but you did too. You started writing in your 40s, 30s?
Yeah, late 30s.
Late 30s. So I say to a lot of people, I encourage people to write, but it's not easy to become a writer. The first book that I wrote is that, Against All Odds, is that it's not about how successful John is, but rather about all the ups and downs. And so many times people said to me, you have to write a book. And I said, I start and I stop and I start and I stop. And I knew if I didn't do it now, 4 or 5 years ago, in my late 70s, that would never happen. So it took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And then that followed is this one, that one, and then the other one and some more. But it's the most difficult part. What do you find about your books have been very, very successful about the marketing side of the book? You have the writing, making sure it's done well. You have the right team to make sure that the expertise of the critics is important. The cover is important. The marketing system is important. What did you find the biggest challenge of not only writing, putting it together, but then getting it into the marketplace?
So the biggest, I would say, the biggest challenge is always dealing with publishers, because publishers typically want, in today's world, a publisher wants to know how many social media followers do you have and how many people can you sell it to directly so that we can make us a return on it before having to do any of the hard work ourselves. So don't let anybody tell you differently. That is the hardest piece of getting a book off the shelf. If you're not choosing to self-publish and you're going to a publisher, you want to find, it's difficult enough to get a publisher, but then when you get one, if you're lucky to get 2 or 3, you want to make sure you can choose one that you can really work with. It's not just going to put you at the bottom of the pile, right? But then the second thing for me is that I'm unfortunate in some ways. I pain over the detail when I get to the editing stage. So by the time this book went off to print, without any exaggeration at all, I would have read each chapter probably close between 50 and 100 times and made very small amends to each of them, and sometimes tear up a few paragraphs and rewrite them again. And you really do need to have a deadline. Otherwise, you could write a book 20 years if you don't have a deadline, because it will never be right. And when people say to you, it took me 2 years, I always thought that that's just what authors said, but it really does take 2 years. It's a lot of work. It takes 2 years. So it's a lot of work. There are other easier formats to get information out. You can blog, you can do podcasts, you could do interviews, you could write for your local business publication or other publication. But there is something very special about a book. There's something very special about getting it delivered, about opening it. There's a feeling of it's a feeling that you're really providing people with some valuable information that might last forever, right? You've got a book sat there, John, on the side that you've had for tens of years.
Yeah.
I've got books sat on my bookshelf that I had from when I was 5 years of age. A book,
Me too.
when a book means something, it will stay with people and they will tell people about it and they loan it to people and they will share information and stories from it for tens of years, 100 years from now. And that is something that we should not let go away. It's really powerful and it's beautiful. There's something quite romantic about it.
I still have the 3 books that I took with me from Holland. The one book was Management by Drucker in Dutch. The other one, Logical Thinking in Dutch. And then the other one about Canada. But I still have them in my house sitting in my bookcase.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's so powerful.
So do you now in other languages, are you doing that as well, multiple languages, or it's mainly in English? Did you do the audio?
Yeah, so it's only in English at the moment, and the way the publishing deals have worked in the past is we release them in English. We wait for a local territory publisher to get in contact, who then wants to license it. So my first book was licensed in China, in France, in Taiwan, and South Korea, and a few other places. So that's generally how it works, and that's great to get on the shelf in China and places like that. And as for the audio, I didn't know, and I really did want to, but it's really, well, you've just done it, John. I mean, it's hard work, right?
I've already done. Yeah,
it's very hard work. And you can, of course, for a few $1,000s, get a really good professional voice artist doing it for you. So I did take that option twice. But who knows? Maybe a book in the future, right?
Yeah. Jamie, and before we go, for all those people who are watching us, both for Jamie and myself, have you got a website, Jamie, that we should leave with the people watching us to contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's my full name, .com or .co.uk, so Jamie Waller, or alternatively, find me on LinkedIn, follow me, send me a friend request, and I will connect with you.
And then also for all those people watching us from around the world, subscribe to both Jamie and my website, like it, share it with others, comment on it, because it encourages both Jamie and myself to do these podcasts that will be seen by millions and millions of people around the world. We love to get our voices out there and to speak about dyslexia, ADHD, entrepreneurship, and just staying fit and healthy through our lives and all of that. Jamie, it was a privilege and a pleasure to have this podcast with you. Let's make sure we stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you giving me the platform. It's a subject really close to my heart. I hope your listeners and viewers have enjoyed it. And a big thank you from me.
And I feel the same about it. The topic is very close to my heart. Again, Jamie, we'll stay in touch.
Brilliant. Thanks, John.
Thanks.